All right, so we are starting on chapter 18 of The Missing Manatee, the last and final chapter. Dirty Dan has explained himself to Skeet, and they decided not to bury the manatee. They're going to let the vultures finish it, what's left. It was a day for surprises. That was for sure. I got another one that afternoon when I told Meemaw that Blink had shot the manatee. She listened and didn't even yell at me for not going to Lenny's. Remember, he told her a lie, as I told her I was doing. When she'd heard the whole story, she smiled real big and nodded as if it was exactly what she'd expected to hear. I had a feeling there was something more to it, Skeeter, she said. I couldn't get my mind around the idea that Dan would kill a manatee in cold blood. It didn't feel right somehow. He may look tough with that nasty old scar and all, but he's a squishy old marshmallow on the inside. Meemaw, I said, speaking of that scar, did Dan ever tell you the whole story on how he got it? She laughed. Shoot, Skeeter. He didn't have to tell me. I was there. I was about to pour myself a glass of milk, and when I heard that, I nearly dropped the carton. You were there? I held the milk carton suspended, my jaw probably hanging halfway to the floor. Meemaw laughed again and patted her hair. What happened, Meemaw? Tell me. Oh, darling, it was a long time ago. But you remember, right? I asked. Like it was yesterday, she answered. I nodded to urge her along. Oh my, we were young, Dan and I. Your Meemaw wasn't always an old lady, believe it or not. I nodded again, wanting to keep the story coming. We had just got out of high school, if you can imagine. I knew Meemaw and Dan were about the same age. I tried to imagine them as high school kids, but the picture I came up with in my mind was kind of fuzzy and kind of funny. Can you picture your grandma and grandpa as high school kids? So what happened? I begged. What happened? Well, it was graduation night. Meemaw began. A group of us seniors got together to kick up our heels one last time before we went off to get jobs or get married or whatever we had planned. We were picnicking and swimming up at the springs. It wasn't like it is now. All commercialized and crowded with so many people on tour boats and all. It was all like our own little private swimming hole. Hardly anybody knew about it except for locals. There were some other older fellows there, and they built a campfire down the shore from us, and they were getting pretty rowdy. Well, it got late and pitch dark. I don't remember why, but I walked away from our group a little ways. Meemaw stopped to pour herself a cup of coffee, and I sat down on the stool by the counter, dying for her to continue. Then, out of nowhere it seemed, one of those older fellows showed up beside me, and I saw right off he had too much to drink. And Skeeter, he wasn't talking or acting like a gentleman at all. I told him to get away from me, but he wouldn't listen. I called for help, and the boys from our group came running over. I was so relieved, thinking that would be the end of it, and we'd all just go home. But that other fellow, he had a little axe hanging from his belt. He'd been using it to cut tree branches for the campfire. We all saw him. Well, he took out that little axe and started swinging it around. And when he did that, all the boys backed off real quick. All except for Dan, bless his heart. A little axe, I thought. She's talking about the hatchet. You could have knocked me over with the feathers on a tarpon fly. The mysterious blonde, the cause of the hatchet fight, I'd imagined so often. It was Meemaw. I could not believe it. Dan came to my rescue like a hero in a storybook, Meemaw went on. He got a horrible cut on his face, and when the fellow with the axe saw all that blood pouring down Dan's cheek and onto his shirt, well, he turned tail and ran like a rabbit. We took Dan to the hospital and got his face stitched up, and that was that. Meemaw took a sip of her coffee and said, I'll always feel responsible for that scar, and I've loved Danny ever since. I laughed. I'd never heard him called anything but Dirty Dan. When I'd recovered enough to speak, I asked her, but if you love him, how come you don't marry him? Then I remembered something and added excitedly, I saw him kiss you after the karaoke contest. I bet he loves you too. Meemaw had a good chuckle over that. I believe he does skeet in his way, but some men are the marrying kind, Skeeter, and some aren't. And I can tell you for a fact that Dan isn't. There's 4 women out there who used to be his wives who'd agree with that. I was young and foolish, but even then I had a hunch Dan would make a much better friend than a husband. I hardly knew what to say. I was so flummoxed by the news. I loved the story of Dan Scar more than ever now, knowing he had got it fighting for my Meemaw. You know something else, Skeet, Meemaw said a while later as she was washing her coffee cup. I believe your mama and daddy might be better at being friends too instead of husband and wife. I thought about it for a bit. Somehow the way Meemaw put it, it didn't sound so terrible anymore. Do you think you could live with that? She asked. I guess I might have to, I said. Meemaw smiled at me. Then she put her hands on her hips and raised her eyebrows. Now, young man, we have something else we need to talk about. Uh-oh, I knew what was coming. Oh, Meemaw, I'm really sorry I lied to you about going to Lenny's. Apology accepted. But that's not what I was going to say. It wasn't? My mind scrambled to think of what else I had done that was bad. Your mom and daddy are so distracted right now, neither of them thought to ask you why you didn't radio for Earl when you found the manatee. But I've been wondering, before I could say anything, she went on, and my guess is that your radio's broken. And you didn't want to tell your mama because it would cramp your style during your school break if you couldn't go out on your boat. Am I right? Meemaw didn't miss much. I had to say that for her. Yeah, it's the antenna, I confessed. I only need $8 more and I can get a new one. Tell you what, I can't make heads or tails of the direction for setting up the karaoke machine. If you'll help me, I'll pay you $10. You promise me that you won't go back out in that boat again until the radio works and the whole thing can be our little secret. Deal, I said, and I gave her a hug. Let's do it right now. I set up the amp, speakers, and microphone where Meemaw wanted it in the living room. Then I showed her how to load the discs with the background music and song lyrics into the player. She got pretty excited when she saw that the kit came with 5 different discs. Ooh, that's a lot of music for her to practice with. And that each one of them held 50 different songs. Oh my gosh, do the math on that. 50 times 5. She especially liked the one that had country hits on it. Why, Skeeter, you're a mechanical genius, she explained when the music to a song called Chattanooga Sugar Babe began to play and the words showed up on the screen. We fooled around with the karaoke machine for a while. We were doing a duet of a song called Crazy when Mom came home and said that's exactly what we were. Then she asked if I'd written my English paper yet and told me I had about an hour to work on it before supper. I went to my room. I'd thrown my artistic trash collection off the bed the night before, and the objects lay scattered on the floor. I started to pick them up and put them in my backpack, and I remembered Mrs. Rathburn telling us that when we had our things gathered, we should take a real close look at them. Look hard, she kept saying. Try to really see the objects and its relation to the others. Look over, under, around, and through. I tried it. At first, I just saw the same pile of junk, but after staring at that stuff for a while, I began to see the different angles and textures. I began rearranging the objects, and I saw how each thing changed depending on where it was in the big picture. That included all the others. It was kind of really cool, and I thought trying to paint them might be fun. The paper was due the next day. I had to get started on it, but I couldn't write about the manatee as Meemaw had suggested. I wasn't peeved anymore for one thing, and the other thing was I didn't want to. As Dan had said the day I caught my tarpon, some things just ought to stay a secret. A weird little idea had been in the back of my mind ever since Meemaw and I had gone to the Golden Moon, and I decided to write about it. I finished the first draft right before Mom called me to dinner. Afterward, I asked if I could ride my bike over to the marina. Meemaw winked at me. I guess she knew why I was going. Larry didn't have the antenna I needed in stock, but he said he could get it in 2 days. Halfway home, I saw Earl driving toward me. He pulled over next to me in his police cart and stopped, and suddenly I felt scared. What if the police had finally decided to do an investigation? Now that I'd made such a big thing out of the manatee, how could I get Earl to back off without betraying Dan? Luckily, Earl spoke first. Dan came to see me a little while ago, he said quietly. He told me what happened to the manatee. I guess he told you too. Yeah, I said. Then quickly I asked, what happens now? You're not going to do anything, right? Are you? I mean, to Dan or to Blink? Earl gazed out at an inflatable raft with a bunch of kids in it passing on the river. Police officers have a certain amount of discretion when it comes to enforcing the law, Skeet. He said slowly, do you know what that means? I shook my head. Not really. Well, it means that sometimes I need to look not just at the crime, but at all the circumstances surrounding the crime. And then I have to decide what course of action best serves the people I'm supposed to be protecting. He paused and added, all afternoon I've been asking myself what good would it do to follow the letter of the law in this case. I thought I knew what he was getting at, but I needed to know for sure. So what did you decide? I asked. I think by now the vultures have pretty much taken care of the body, and what's left of it will soon sink down into the muck and disappear, and that's where it'll stay. That's what I think. I nodded and smiled. Case closed. Case closed. And that is the end of chapter 18. What do you think is going to happen next? Where's Skeeter going to go? What's Grandma going to do? And what is going to happen with Mac and Ma? These are really good questions. Maybe you can write out in a paragraph what you think is going to happen next.